Welcome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Band Together Remote Musical Collaboration Research Project launch. My name is Jai Jua, and I am coming to you from the land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people here in what's also known as Vancouver. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Bunce. Some people know me as Johnny Novacourt. I'm the artistic and executive director of Wavelength. And we're gathered here in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Wa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people here in the city of Toronto or Toronto. So thanks everyone for being here. So I'm going to tell you a bit about what to expect tonight. It's going to be three parts to our event. We're going to conclude with a live performance here in SyncSpace.live by Gurpreet, Chana, and Truss. Before that, we're going to have a little panel discussion about the project, and we're going to start off with the premiere of a documentary about our project. This documentary basically summarizes what was in the report. And this documentary was brought to us by the good people at Last Frame Pictures. So without further ado, let's kick things off with the Band Together documentary.
And one last thing would be that if you feel like it, please chat. There in the YouTube, there is a place for you to be able to ask questions as we go along. We will try to answer them as we go. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, Jai. Let's see the documentary. In March of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic brought live music to a halt. Around the world, bands and musicians were suddenly unable to be together or play together. It was during those strange early days of lockdown that Wavelength hatched the Band Together project to research and explore remote musical collaboration. Playing live over the internet. Yes, it is possible, but there are limitations, mostly related to digital latency, the time delay over the internet signals. Yes, it is. Over the course of 2 years, Wavelength brought together a team of musicians, curators, and audio experts to take part in a series of online workshops and discussions. The core team collaborated with other musicians to test out a slate of software and hardware platforms. Each of these platforms was then assessed through a defined series of attributes. The result is something of a consumer guide to remote musical collaboration. The pandemic may have subsided, but we still see plenty of applications for this technology. Let's see what our team came up with.
One of the most amazing things about SyncSpace was that it was possible to engage in remote musical collaboration. I remember the first thing we did was count together. And just to count to 4 and continuously, in a loop.
It's in the name, right? Like SyncSpace, but it's just great to be able to jam in real time and not even have to worry about, oh shoot, a little delay here, a little delay here. Am I at 128 or 64 samples? Like that wasn't a stress. You just set it and forget it, and getting on the server, things like that wasn't an issue.
The SyncSpace website and what Adrian has done there was very supportive in the process. Even before getting an account, just sort of talking about the ins and outs of what remote musical collaboration takes. Not only was it a good resource that helped this process of setting up, but when we did run into issues, Adrian from SyncSpace was extremely responsive in a timely and caring manner, which was so supportive throughout the process.
Yeah. Again, speaking to how detailed the website is, or even just as far as explaining every little detail down to the internet connection. The learning curve almost felt invisible for me just because every single step of the way I was led.
The audio and video quality, I've actually been surprised at how good it is when our connection is strong. You're only able to have 2 inputs and 2 outputs. So when you are thinking about collaborating remotely through SyncSpace, it's important to consider how you're going to use those 2 inputs for what you want to present. And there's different audio interfaces that can support that process. Even if you don't have an audio interface, you can use it with your built-in inputs and outputs, which is also good to know.
And even just having like the one mic available for like a room mic has been working for us as well.
Yeah.
But it sounds great.
One thing that I have noticed is the more regularly that I'm on it, you start figuring out how to tweak a few things along the way when it comes to audio quality in particular. It's not just for SyncSpace, but I think it may be a larger kind of remote musical collaboration direction, just to continuously think about what accessibility looks like for as wide a group of people and musicians and artists as possible. We're both sitting in Toronto, where internet connectivity is available to us. Some of these issues in terms of accessibility are not on the individual, but on the larger systems that we're a part of and rely upon to stay connected. I think the beauty of RMC is that if it works for musicians, it can pretty much work for so many other applications and processes when it comes to collaboration.
We both are in different situations where we're not always able to meet up in person anyways, and being able to create like this, like even as we prepare, it's just like we're making magic, man, like, and that's something that to be able to do virtually is insane, and I personally don't want to stop doing that, so I'm definitely going to continue to use this.
So the idea with SyncSpace is to create a next level experience for musicians to perform together on the internet, where they can not only say rehearse, but they can actually perform in a live concert and also have a live studio online at the same time, helping them with the broadcast and actually broadcasting the whole thing, the whole performance to a live audience. When the pandemic hit, like a lot of musicians, I found I was restricted in what I could do in terms of performing to audiences. So like a lot of musicians, I started to do things online, and that initially really meant that I had to do things by myself. Now I'm very fortunate that I happen to live with another musician. My wife is a musician, so we were at least able to perform together, and we were able to live stream that out. But still, it was just the two of us. And for many other musicians, they could only perform, by themselves, or possibly with some kind of a pre-recorded track. So I wondered about the possibility of being able to perform together and interact and collaborate online through the internet. There are many challenges to what I described. So the first one, the most sort of obvious one, is that when you try to perform music together in real time across the internet, that there is some latency, some delay between the time that you send your sound out and someone else on the other end hears it. That latency can sometimes be enough that it would make it difficult or impossible or very uncomfortable to try to play music together. The other challenge that we had is that you're trying to perform, and at the same time, you're trying to muck with all this technology, all this computer stuff and audio gear and everything else. When you perform in a room, often at a venue, there is someone there, an engineer, or a sound engineer, or someone operating cameras or other things, who is able to help you with all this stuff. So I wanted to have an experience where the musicians could basically have someone there throughout the performance who would be able to help them out and support them. The pandemic was really, when we were very restricted and we had to socially distance, we used the platform to put on lots of, literally hundreds of live performances. Moving forward now, even though we're able to play together in person, there are still a lot of opportunities to use the technology for various things. For one, you can use it to rehearse. You can use it to rehearse and not have to deal with traveling and packing up all your gear and tearing down all your gear and all that other stuff. You can collaborate with people at a distance where otherwise it would be hard, difficult or expensive, right? Or possibly, impossible to make it happen. We did a lot of things even during the pandemic where we had musicians collaborating who otherwise would never even have collaborated. So we have we did many concerts with musicians who have they still haven't even met. The other thing that's since happened, and although initially SyncSpace started off being all about performing and rehearsing, it's now a fair bit of it is about teaching. So we have people, music teachers, musicians who teach online, and they want to provide the best possible experience for them and their students. So that's another thing that we're really focusing on moving forward.
I think my first impression of Pedal is how simple it is. It's literally just the box, the red box that pops up on your screen, and there's like maybe 2 or 3 things you can do on there, but other than that, you're really working in your own DAW on your device, and that was my first impression. It's just very straightforward. I think something I really appreciate with Pedal is that your output, like what you're creating, is just dependent on your understanding of your own DAW, because you don't have to really learn a whole new system in order to create with Pedal. You're using softwares that you already understand and have access to. You don't have to go through that learning curve of adding this new tool to your like creative process. It's really just there to make things easier and allow you to collaborate. I really liked that they had the video functionality built into Pedal. So other times with other platforms, I had a Zoom meeting going so I could see my collaborator and we could talk. I will say that our programs crashed a couple times and it wasn't detrimental. Like everything always auto-saved. It didn't change our output, but it is something to be aware of. Maybe it depends on the kind of program you're using, the device that it's all running on. But for us, we found that with our laptops that we use all the time for other music things, there was a bit of crashing. So that's something to keep in mind. If your program doesn't auto-save, make sure you're saving as you go. The main function of Pedal is transferring files and recording audio. And I do want to say that the file transfer was so seamless, like it was so quick. And both of us were really blown away when we started to play around with that function. So I just wanted to shout that out.
When I started working with these softwares was actually a little bit before the pandemic. So I was lucky to have researched them a little bit. So once we started working with different programs we had, Jam Studio, which is actually jamstat.io, was one of them. I enjoyed it, as most of them did. There were always some issues depending on how fast the internet was for other people. But for the most part, the fact that you could do video and audio and jam with other people and collaborate in that sense was definitely appreciated. Yeah, it was definitely user-friendly, even more so if you are not really that concerned about using the quality for it for actually, in a song that's going to be released. For collaborating and jamming or rehearsing or even writing together, this program was awesome for that. The quality is definitely usable. Again, it depends on what tolerance level you have for quality. In my case, I would do a lot of live streaming and also I'm a recording engineer. So I would say it's not adequate for final release, but if it's for something that's maybe for a live stream, or as I said before, for writing, songwriting, and collaborating and jamming and rehearsing, it's definitely more than fine. The fact that you could have a private chat that is seen only by the people that are participating in the session was definitely helpful. Because sometimes when you're doing a live stream or some sort of collaboration where there's an audience present, you can use phones and you can use other things, but it was good to be able to collaborate like that and to communicate like that. But also the fact that there's rooms that are open. So if you weren't necessarily going to write with someone in mind and you just wanted to connect your guitar or vocals or drums or whatever, there's communities or different groups that are already open where you can just join. And I found most of the people within the community were really open-minded and they were helpful, and it was a good vibe overall.
got to be honest with you. Our experience using SoundJack wasn't the best. And like we didn't get very far. We sort of wrestled with it for a while over a few different days. We were able to get it working, but we never really got to the point where we were truly able to collaborate with each other. It was easy to install and get up and running and get it working with my own system, like my own audio card. But when it came time to connect with my collaborator online, that's when things got a little dicey. We couldn't get, the DAWs working back and forth with each other with SoundJack. So if you just wanted to put a microphone in the room and jam with each other, you could do that, and the latency was fine if you're just sort of doing loose kind of things, playing guitar, singing along with each other. If one person was doing something rhythmic and the other person was singing, it was okay. But as soon as you wanted to do any kind of click track or tempo lock, any kind of thing like that, then it really fell apart really quickly. It wasn't like I could get my VST instrument running on my end and they could get it going on their end. We could hear each other's instruments and then jam. Like we couldn't even get those things to talk to each other at all. So even before the rhythmic problem of falling in and out, not being in sync with each other because we're both, listening to a different MIDI clock, we couldn't even hear the actual VSTs at all. So it kind of fell apart pretty quickly for us. I'd say the one thing that, SoundJack did make pretty easy was finding your collaborator. Let's say, big button, add player, that kind of made it easy to find each other and add them.
BandLab was really interesting. I made a beat or like a mashup with a friend of mine, and I found it really easy to work with as someone that's not always using DAWs. I know my way around them, but I'm not really producing music all the time or anything like that. So I thought it was a really kind of comfortable space for me to play around and work on things. I really enjoyed it. I think it's great for beginners. I really appreciated the simplicity of this DAW. It's a lot less intimidating than, say, like Ableton or Logic, where there's so many things that you can do. And I feel like BandLab gives you the basic functions to produce something and play around with a drum kit and that kind of stuff. So I think the learning curve is not so bad with this one. Also, in terms of accessibility, it's like browser based. So you don't download a new program or anything like that. I really enjoy the simplicity of BandLab, but I will say that there were a couple things that I wish were a little bit different. So we noticed that the drum kit, you can't add your own sounds. You're limited to what they give you, which for beginners is totally cool. But then if you're working with someone that's used to like using their own sounds and kind of components, then those kind of things, I would say, impact the output and what you can create. You can invite up to 50 collaborators. So if you have a band, this is great. Or I think they also use this for like classrooms as well, which feels like the perfect use of a platform like this. And it also doubles almost like a social media platform in some ways, because you have the DAW and the work that you're doing in there, but there's another side of BandLab where everybody has a profile and you can post the music that you're creating, and you have the option to make your music forkable, which means that somebody else can look through your profile, find a track that you made, put that into their own BandLab DAW and remix it and do different things with it. So it's another way that musicians can collaborate. I know when we were experimenting with different platforms, we talked about like bringing in somebody that you know and collaborating in that way. But there's also this whole other element of collaboration.
In March of 2020, The COVID-19
beat or like a mashup with a friend of mine, and I found it really easy to work with as someone that's not always using DAWs. I know my way around them, but I'm not really producing music all the time or anything like that. So I thought it was a really kind of comfortable space for me to play around and work on things. I really enjoyed it. I think it's great for beginners. I really appreciated the simplicity of this DAW. It's a lot less intimidating than, say, like Ableton or Logic, where there's so many things that you can do. And I feel like BandLab gives you the basic functions to produce something and play around with a drum kit and that kind of stuff. So I think the learning curve is not so bad with this one. Also, in terms of accessibility, it's like browser based. So you don't download a new program or anything like that. I really enjoy the simplicity of BandLab, but I will say that there were a couple things that I wish were a little bit different. So we noticed that the drum kit, you can't add your own sounds. You're limited to what they give you, which for beginners is totally cool. But then if you're working with someone that's used to like using their own sounds and kind of components, then those kind of things, I would say, impact the output and what you can create. You can invite up to 50 collaborators. So if you have a band, this is great. Or I think they also use this for like classrooms as well, which feels like the perfect use of a platform like this. And it also doubles almost like a social media platform in some ways, because you have the DAW and the work that you're doing in there, but there's another side of BandLab where everybody has a profile and you can post the music that you're creating, and you have the option to make your music forkable, which means that somebody else can look through your profile, find a track that you made that they really enjoy, and they can then put that into their own BandLab DAW and remix it and do different things with it. So it's another way that musicians can collaborate. I know when we were experimenting with different platforms, we talked about like bringing in somebody that you know and collaborating in that way. But there's also this whole other element of collaboration that can happen on BandLab just by posting your music on their platform that I really, I think is really exciting.
We've all been on quite a journey through the pandemic. While nothing can replace the feeling of making air molecules in the same room vibrate, many musicians have found that online collaboration has given them a new lease on life, connecting them to a whole world of potential collaborators. If you're ready to explore remote musical collaboration, there are plenty of tools out there to choose from. On behalf of Wavelength, thank you to our funders at the Canada Council for the Arts Digital Strategy Fund. Please visit wavelengthmusic.ca/bandtogether to download the full report. Let's see how this new online culture evolves.
Okay, Johnny, you're back. I'll just have to wait for a... He's back. Hold on. Let me just grab his video again.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the documentary. And let's say thank you to our friends at Last Frame Pictures for helping us put that together. And I'm going to pass things back over to you, Jai. Thanks for being our facilitator for the Band Together report launch panel discussion.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Johnny. What a great video that was. I saw it for the first time yesterday, and it really does capture, I think, the real sense of what we were up to. So, what's really important, I guess, is we wanted to kind of share a little bit about the process and try and kind of figure out, how we might be able to share with you what we were up to. I think that, as Johnny said, the project really started as a digital strategies project, and I think it really came from this idea of the pandemic needing to understand how musicians could connect and collaborate, as obviously in the video we were talking about, over the internet. And so, a little bit about the process was that, we came together, and the group had had several meetings. And one of the first meetings that I participated in, we started first trying to find, what was the idea around all of the different ways that we could connect. And for example, what were the different ways that we thought were important? Um, for so many of the folks that participated being professional musicians, the idea of what exactly could define an important remote music collaboration tool would be really important. And at the same time, we were also talking about what we could call it. And we were using a tool called Miro, which is a digital whiteboard, at the same time to do both these things, kind of brainstorm on what these attributes were, and also to try and find out what a name was. We had a lot of different names,
Yeah.
which was really fun. And, I want to give credit where credit's due. I think it was Sam that came up with the idea of Band Together. And prior to that, we have been calling it, and you might have heard that in the video, RMC, Remote Musical Collaboration. So Band Together was just a real immediate hit. As was our process, we voted on it, and that was the one that came to the top for sure. But also with the attributes, it was a similar kind of process. I think, my role as a facilitator was really to try and gather up all of the input and come up with a way that we could kind of figure out and narrow down what we wanted to do. And that's what really everyone contributed to. So we came up with a number of different areas. We wanted the tool to be user friendly. We wanted it to be accessible. We wanted high quality output, obviously. And we also wanted some other aspects like, was it synchronous or not synchronous? Did it have other issues? Like Sam mentioned, the idea of it being a social media aspect. Could it record? Could it save different sessions? All of those things were actually 25 final aspects, final attributes that then everyone went and ranked. And what was really great is I felt like watching the process from the outside is that people really had a good sense of what those meant. We did have some conversations about, what exactly does easy to set up mean? How do we want to think about multi-platform, internationalization, affordability? And, one point as well that, we make in the report is that, you know, even though everyone is a professional musicians or producers, the idea of accessibility about affordability was really important. And that was a good point of comparison to try and figure out what was, important. At the end of the day, though, all of these attributes kind of went into the kind of assessment framework that we had. And that's when, at that end time where we had a number of different options, we then moved towards trying to find the actual, and I think that this was Johnny's idea um, to really put some actual work into performance and working through what those would be like and letting people try them out in a real context. And that's where the work really came up. Uh, Johnny, am I missing anything that you would want to add to this?
No, I mean, I love a good origin story, so I always want to go wind way back to the beginning to tell the story of how anything came to be. And it's funny actually launching this project now on the third anniversary of the pandemic. It's been a long gestation for this project from from the initial idea and now finally launching it to the world. It's taken quite some time, but I like that it wasn't rushed. It was sort of almost coming into the world in this in this new era. We can't even really say it's post pandemic because we're still in the pandemic in many ways. And even though Band Together was a product of the pandemic, the initial conversations actually predate COVID-19. I think back to I would think it was, well, 2018 was when the Canada Council launched the Digital Strategy Fund. And I feel like this project might be one of the very last Digital Strategy Fund projects to finally be launched into the world. But for those who are familiar with our great nation of Canada's beloved public funding systems, our fellow friends and arts organizations may remember the launch of the Digital Strategy Fund almost 5 years ago, which was a really exciting new fund that the Canada Council for the Arts launched. But it was also a kind of a confusing program that was a bit hard to understand. And at that point, when it launched, Aaron Dawson and I, who at that point was Wavelength's general manager, we were trying to figure out, okay, how can we access this fund and what can we do with it? Because there are these sort of eligibility limitations. You couldn't do the typical things that an arts organization might want to do with something related to digital strategy. You couldn't use it to upgrade your website. You couldn't use it to hire a social media coordinator and those kind of things. It was really a lot about what they call digital literacy and intelligence, and about learning to solve a problem in the digital realm. And then, so we never ended up applying in this first sort of year and a half that the fund was open. And then I remember maybe a year and a bit later, in the fall of 2019, Aaron and I were at one of the arts and culture meetups that Menon Dworka and Heather Kelly were hosting at Insomnia Lounge, which were the sort of art scene mixer nights. And we were chatting with Gurpreet Chana, who I know Aaron had a collaboration with, I think it's called Clocks. They had an ongoing musical collaboration. And three of us were really chatting. We were even talking about then about what if we could collaborate over the internet with people in other parts of the world. That was actually this idea that we had even before the pandemic, where we thought, wow, that would be amazing and crazy, just thinking about it, even in terms of like climate change challenges, like the challenges of touring, the way that how international artists were so hard to bring over here to perform. Or what if we can get them to perform live over the internet? And then, a few months after that, COVID happened. And that, of course, really was the sort of impetus for this project. Suddenly, we had a real problem to solve. And thinking about that now, it's really interesting because it's still really relevant, I think, in terms of even though we went through this whole phase of presenting live stream concerts, and that was really the sort of like the first few band together meetings that we had, which were kind of like this, sort of like a Zoom session where the first couple were almost just everyone just dealing with their sort of emotional trauma of feeling isolated and having their connection to the creative world cut off. Before we sort of really started to dive into more of the technical problems, and I really loved how you sort of laid out the attributes, and figuring out that assessment framework was really powerful in terms of how we were going to assess these platforms. But at first it was there was a lot of just sort of dealing with our, how is our as musicians, as producers, as curators, like how is our artistic practice being affected by the pandemic and the isolation of lockdown. We were doing, and Wavelength was doing things like in May of 2020, we did a concert with a band where two of the band members were a couple, and the third band member, who's the bass player, who was their friend, played on the porch, and the rest of the band were playing in the living room. So there were all these sort of creative solutions that we had to these amazing creative workarounds that were really kind of building the digital literacy and intelligence. And I feel like that all kind of laid the framework for us being able to sort of grapple with what we were dealing with before we could really dive into the technical side of things, and then do the individual research that we all needed to do to figure out which platforms we wanted to use, which ones really met the assessment criteria, which ones didn't. And then the final phase, as you said, was actually like putting it into practice. All our individual core team members paired up with the collaborator or two to actually test out their chosen platforms. I think we did an initial like a final assessment where it was between sort of 3 to 8 platforms each that we were all considering, and then it was down to sort of really just sort of 1 or 2 that everyone really chose to focus in on to test, and that ended up becoming our top 5 awards. So yeah, it's kind of funny. Also presenting this the week of the Oscars and the Junos. It feels like this is our version of award season for remote musical collaboration, and um, it's pretty amazing to see that there are so many platforms to choose from right now. Um, so yeah, that sums up the experience for me. I think the last thing I also want to say is that for Wavelength, this is a really new type of project for us as an organization, because we're a presenting organization primarily. We mostly put on concerts. We often interview bands, but coming in more from sort of a music journalist background. But this was our really first project where we took a research approach. This is a research project. It's R&D. It's a real new thing, and the first of its kind for our organization. So we're really excited that everyone is here to participate and to learn more about the project. And I do encourage everyone to go to wavelengthmusic.ca/band together to download the report to learn more. And hopefully you can try out these platforms for yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Johnny. We'd love to now kind of like turn it over to one of the participants, Guillermo Sabasti, and hear from him what his experience was in working with the project and some of his thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Jive. Yeah, I'm a producer and a musician and an engineer as well. Um, I was lucky that before the pandemic started, I had already started sort of wanting to do something like a show with multi-camera setup and sound and everything from my studio, because I always love how it sounds there, and I wanted to do that for other people. But then the pandemic started, and I already had a lot of that know-how of like OBS and different programs. And I was offering that to bands. And it worked out for maybe a few days until the restrictions made it so that we couldn't have 4 or 5 people in the studio anymore. So then I started thinking like, okay, how do I make it so that I can have people from different places work and play together, and that's when I started hitting a lot of the hurdles that you were describing, which is obviously latency is the main issue. Um, so I was lucky to be invited to join the group, and it was awesome because before that, a lot of the research was done just by myself. So it was great to be able to bounce ideas off, and if there's 10 different programs that we had to try, that we could manage, 2 programs each kind of thing, and then share our own experiences with that. I certainly tried a lot of them, and a lot of the time the issues I had were that the programs still had latency, or if they didn't have latency, then you were dealing with the internet situation of other people as well, which unfortunately is still a problem. Or else you could work with the audio but not with the video, or you could work with the audio but the quality wouldn't be great. um, I obviously already had ways of sending high quality audio to people, using programs that we've been using in studios for a long time to be able to send high quality audio. But then that means that you're getting the audio like 3 or 4 seconds later, which obviously if you're trying to play together, it's just not doable at all. um, so, and obviously, some of them were good quality wise for the audio, but they didn't have video, which worked okay. But obviously having the ability to also have the video, not necessarily super high quality, but something where you could see the other person as you're playing, would work great. um, and the other event, so I found SyncSpace, and it worked out awesomely because it does take care of a lot of those issues. You can have video, you can have audio. For myself as an audio engineer, I could also control the volume of different performers before it goes out online, before I push it to either YouTube or Facebook or whatever, or in the SyncSpace website itself. Um, but the other advantage I had, and this is something that we share in the group as well, is that using programs kind of like TeamViewer or even in Zoom, when someone shares their screen, you're able to request remote control. I was able to actually get inside their computer and manage all the software part for that for them. So all they had to do was basically connect their microphones to their interfaces. And then I would open whatever DAW they had and then apply EQ, compression, a little bit of reverb, and just make it so that the what they're sending me is a bit more produced than just raw audio. And with that, depending on the budget, uh, people are able to just send their vocals, or maybe a guitar or an ambient microphone, which, if they're in a room that's not too noisy, and if they have an electric guitar, for example, they're able to move the amp a bit farther so it's not competing with their vocals, or lower the volume of that. They're able to have a pretty well balanced mix with just one microphone. Um, for others, if their budget allowed, what we suggested was using either an analog board or a digital board, do all the processing there, and then send that as a one or two channels into another interface. So then what they're sending could be a multi-track or multi-mic drum setup, for example. In my case, that's what I was using. I have universal audio interfaces, which, in this case worked out great because unlike others, I was able to actually apply compression or EQ before things get sent over to the other person without any latency. So again, having just the audio by itself with high quality, it's great, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist in that sense, so being able to at least high pass things so there's no rumble on vocals, or maybe add a little bit of high frequencies to a pretty dull guitar, or apply some compression to drums, has always been something that I want to do. Um, so yeah, it was awesome to be able to share with everyone. The meetings were a lot of fun. They were really well done, and super respectful as well. We would do like a 10 or 15-minute checkup on everyone and how they're doing, and all that stuff. So I always felt welcome, and it did feel like we were moving forward, and that the ideas hopefully represent something that makes other people not have to start from scratch, and have this data that other people already experienced, to be able to build on what they're doing. That's pretty much
Awesome.
it.
Yeah. Thanks, Guillermo. And we're lucky enough today to also have Adrian. And Adrian Cho is the founder of SyncSpace, and we're actually using SyncSpace now, so that's kind of cool. We are, walking the talk, and we thought it'd be great to hear his perspective, given that it's a Canadian product and Adrian's in Ottawa. So maybe, Adrian, do you want to let us know, what is the story of SyncSpace from your perspective?
Sure. Thanks, Jai. Well, so I'm a musician, and at the beginning of the pandemic, like most other musicians, I was in a situation where I couldn't perform with other musicians, right, because of the social distancing. And I was very fortunate that I live with another musician. My wife is a musician, so at least when we were able to live stream and do shows, we could play together, right? But we couldn't do anything with anyone else. And in the beginning, we started doing what a lot of other people did, which was we would multi-track stuff and we would send it back and forth, and produce something, right? But we weren't actually playing with that other person outside of our house live, right? It was something that we would send to them, and so that was quite limiting. So I started looking, like a lot of people, at this whole space, and the interesting thing was I was told initially, I mean, I had some people who just said to me flat out, you can't do it, it's impossible, right? So long story short, I found that no, it's not impossible. It actually is quite possible. Now the thing is that the technology to send the audio, with low latency, assuming that you have a low latency internet connection, has been around for a long time, right? So some of these things that were mentioned in the video, and some of the others that also may not have been around for a very long time. But the trick is, or I think one of the things has been in the past, that no one really used them for anything that would be what you might call like a professional level thing. Like, in other words, what I wanted to do is I wanted to put on concerts, like gigs, right? And I wanted the production quality to be good enough that people would pay for tickets to attend these concerts, right? And that the experience for the audience and the experience for the musicians would be as good as it could possibly be, given, you know, all the constraints that we have in place, right, with playing over the internet and not requiring people to go and spend thousands of dollars on equipment and so forth, right? So, you know, we're trying to make it a different kind of experience. And so, as an example, one of those things that I wanted is that I wanted it so that during the gig, during the performance, the musicians had someone who was online with them in the space, who was mixing the sound, switching the cameras, and doing everything for them, so that they didn't have to worry about that. And just like when you're in a you know, physical venue, right? There's often someone there, if not multiple people, who are doing a lot of those things for you and supporting you. Because a lot of us, the musicians, we quickly found out when we tried to do this live streaming thing by ourselves, it's really hard. That's assuming everything goes well, right? I mean, you're trying to do all this stuff and perform at the same time, and it's very, very difficult. And so with this setup in SyncSpace, the musicians just play, right? And whoever is the engineer, if it's me, for example, you know, which I'll be doing later on, you know, I'm mixing the sound, I'm doing everything. I'm also, you know, looking at the chat to see, you know, what the feedback is and so forth, right? So that's sort of one aspect of it. And then the other thing is that with the audience experience, of course, you know, for many people, they just want to watch a live stream on YouTube, and that's pretty cool. And especially if you're watching from a mobile device, that sort of often works out best. But if you had access to a computer and you wanted a more enhanced experience, there's a whole other thing which a lot of people don't even really know about, that is the part of the SyncSpace live sort of audience experience. So there's actually a way in SyncSpace, when we were doing our concerts, to go into a virtual venue like a club and sit at a table and watch the show with other people and be chatting to those other people, and while you're listening together to the concert and watching it in your headphones. So we had people who were in different countries, you know, in France and Canada and so forth, who were, and some of them were family members, you know, who were sharing the experience of watching the show together and experiencing the show together as much as they could, right, given the distance. So anyway, you know, I started researching all of this around, I think it was late 2020, and then I remember sort of figuring out, it was funny because I said to my wife at one point, I said, you know, in order to do this, and, you know, you're going to have to operate a whole bunch of servers and a whole bunch of things, and I just want to help some musicians in, you know, in Ottawa and in Canada. I don't really want to like be running like this whole thing with servers all over the place. And the next thing you know, that's what I was doing. So the thing is that the whole thing was totally unplanned. I never had any plans to do this at all. And then the other thing is that I had spent, even though I'd been doing music all my life, I also had a career in software development, but I had not written any code like full time for 20 years. And I remember at the time I had a bunch of things that I wanted to implement, and I was looking for someone to help me do it, and I couldn't find anyone. So I just said, okay, well, bugger it, I have no choice. I'm just going to have to do it myself. And so I ended up then, you know, spending all this time writing code and doing so many things that I never thought I was ever going to be doing. Even I learned so much about the way the internet operates and the internet routing and everything and the latency. And I also learned a lot about just even the, you know, because everyone talks about the latency and they say, okay, well, you know, how can you do it? Like the latency is a problem. Well, the fact is, what a lot of people miss is that in a real world situation, in a room, there's latency too, right? And in fact, the musicians who are used to playing in, say, large venues or on large sound stages, like in an orchestra where it's 100 foot from one side of the orchestra to the other, they're experiencing latency all the time, right? So there's lots of little things about this. There's lots of you know, details that you really have to dive into to really understand. Earlier today, I was part of a really exciting test. We had a musician on stage in a theater in Virginia Beach, and he was performing just in a test. There was no audience. He was performing with a vocalist who was in Nashville, but the difference was that her audio and video was being sort of projected, into the theater, and she was appearing on a big screen, right? So basically, it's an opportunity where you can have a band that's on stage and you can have guests come in remotely, right? And the band is collaborating. They're performing live, right? And so it's not quite the same thing as you'll see tonight, where we're actually sort of broadcasting the whole thing and everyone's in sort of cyberspace. This is a different kind of a thing where, a lot of people are in the one room and the audience is in that same room, but you actually bring in other people. So that, it's led to so many things. And I think, as was also mentioned in the video, later on, then I developed a teaching service because I wanted to address the needs of music teachers. And so that's something I've been, working on for a while. And now, as I mentioned, like with this test that we did earlier today, now there's sort of a different kind of aspect to it as we change, as the parameters change right now, as we've gone back to in-person events, right, we sort of figure out, okay, how can we still use the technology? I mean, you can still use it for rehearsing, of course. You can still, of course, do broadcasts, with performances like we're going to show later on, where everyone is at home, but you can also then do things that are more of a hybrid thing as well.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. Some viewers were reporting that your voice was a little low, so maybe it's
okay.
just about leaning into the mic a little bit more.
It's actually right here, but I'll boost the gain.
Okay. We've got an opportunity now for anyone to put some questions in the chat. But maybe I will start with kind of the first one. Obviously, this opens up a different kind of performance opportunity. Johnny, do you feel that this is something that Wavelength might be doing more of? Will you have more live concerts using this technology?
That's a great question. I think we want to see how it goes. Obviously, like this concert tonight is the first of its kind. But I think that it's a really interesting question, and I think that in some ways, I think that there was a lot of sort of live stream fatigue. Especially when people came back to in-person concerts, there was definitely a sort of drop off in interest in online events. But I think that I'd also like to think that this format is here to stay in some ways, and the element of accessibility that it provides is really something that shouldn't be overlooked. And I definitely think that it's something that we're seriously going to consider as maybe not a core element of our programming, but something that could be an additional, or like perhaps a seasonal event, maybe an annual event. It's really intriguing, and having learned so much about this, I definitely think that it's something that we as a presenter are going to consider exploring, especially with the opportunity to going back to even the idea that we had originally. I guess as we learn more, there are sort of geographical boundaries, which I sort of wanted to ask maybe Adrian to talk a bit about. I think that is one of the elements, like our original dream of getting to collaborate with musicians on different continents might be far-fetched. But I know that there are some other platforms, like one is called Jack Trip, and they have over the course of the pandemic, they've had hundreds of events, more with artists, I think, in the sort of free improvised experimental music genre, where they've had artists from different continents playing together, often sort of playing music where the latency doesn't really affect it, where it's not necessarily something that has to be locked in meter-wise. Like that element is really interesting, of just the idea of a free-form jam between musicians on different continents. It's super interesting, and something that I can see there being a lot of potential to activate. But but yeah, maybe I can ask that question to Adrian. Like, if I can jump in and throw my own question in there. I know we talked a bit about this in the interview that people can read in the report, in the PDF report, the 26-page PDF report of the Band Together project. Adrian, can you explain a bit about how geographical distance affects latency or contributes to latency within remote musical collaboration?
Yeah, certainly. Okay, hopefully my audio is a little bit better. I'll try to do a better job here with mixing the levels too. So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because often I'll get people who will approach me and they'll say, I've got, this person here, this person there. Will it work? That's often the question. Will it work? And that's a really hard question to answer because it totally depends on what you're doing, right? It depends on what style of music you're playing, and also what roles people are playing in the ensemble. So as an example, right, we had a concert where we had the rhythm section in a band was in Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal, but we had two musicians who were playing from the university, from St. FX out in Antigonish in Nova Scotia, which is very far, right? And they were playing trumpet and saxophone. And in that case, it worked because they were able to, the sort of the horn players are sailing atop the rhythm section there, but for the rhythm section, it's fairly tight. So the way to think about it is that in a room, it would be like the rhythm section is like 6 feet apart from one another, right? It's very tight for them and they feel very little audio delay, but it would have felt like to the horn players that the two of them together were, say, maybe 20 feet away from everyone else, right? But it worked. And just like this test that we actually did earlier today, the singer in Nashville and the pianist was in Virginia Beach and was actually quite far away, right? And I would never have a bass player and a drummer that far away trying to play together and trying to play 300 beats a minute. But for certain situations, it works. And so I did, for example, one concert, we had a whole choir in New York, about 25 people all around New York State. And we had a flute soloist in Colorado and a harpist in San Diego. So it's like right across the other side of the country. Totally insane, right? But it worked. It totally worked. And actually also that harpist, she's very used to playing in a very large ensemble like an orchestra, right? Where you really get very high latency. So she had no issues with it, right? Regarding the geographical thing is that, so one thing that is true, it doesn't matter what software or hardware or anything you're using, you can't change the laws of physics, right? And so for certain, the distance, the geographical distance does play a part, but one thing that we learned about through all of this that a lot of us didn't really know before, and most people still probably don't know today, is that a lot of it depends on the routing on the internet. So one of the things that I learned, for example, is that you can be down the street from someone else, right? And when you send your traffic, your audio traffic to them, for example, if the internet routing is not good, it can actually be going out of town, like to another city, and then coming back, right? So it's like, if you want to send that person a letter, you could have just gone and dropped it down the street, but instead you put it in the mailbox, and for some crazy reason, it went out of town and came all the way back, right? And then that's not optimal at all, right? And so I ended up learning all these things about the internet routing, and I know, for example, that if you're in Ottawa, and if you're on Rogers infrastructure, that and you try to send your data from one person to another person in Ottawa, it goes to Toronto and comes back, right? I know that if you're on Bell, it used to be that it was routed locally in Ottawa, but then about 18 months ago it changed and it now goes to Montreal and back, right? So now what we do, for example, if we're playing in Ottawa, we have two musicians, we have to put the server in Montreal, right? Because we know that that's sort of going to be the optimal routing. So there's all these little things that you find out, and so I mean the bottom line is that, is it possible to do intercontinental things? Is it possible to do things that are very, very long distance? Yes, it's possible depending on what it is, right? But certainly I think the thing is that for most of the time when we're trying to play, R&B or classical music or any kind of thing where we sort of expect to be, let's say, anywhere between for it to feel like we're 6 to 20 feet apart in a room, like how it would be, you really can't be more than 1,000 kilometers, let's say, right, apart. If you want to play something that's more free, where the time doesn't matter so much and so forth, then yeah, I mean, sure, you can start going beyond that. I think one thing that is exciting though, and we did this a few times, is having people like across the Canadian-US border, right? Because it's fairly close. In fact, like we did Toronto and New York, but you don't have to deal with immigration or anything, which is pretty cool.
Amazing. Yeah. And I wanted to ask actually Guillermo a question. Obviously as musicians, getting in a room together, the vibe is right there. It's immediate. What's the level of creativity that you feel like you can find in this? Like, can you describe a little bit about how that might work for you? Does it feel the same? I mean, it seems like it must be very different, but what's that vibe of creativity?
I think it takes a little bit of getting used to it. But as it was mentioned, and this is something that I argue with a lot of people that complain about latency on their headphones when they're in a studio and like something happens with the buffer size or whatever. It's like, when you're playing, there is a latency just by the space and the speed of sound itself. Like if you're talking about like just a couple milliseconds of latency, like that's less than a meter away from you, like it's still very close to you. So if you're playing with a drummer and they're like standing 3 meters from you, there's a latency there just physically. Um, so it takes a little bit of getting used to it, but once they get used to it, I've been in lots of sessions where it just feels like being there. There's obviously a bit of a fatigue that happens eventually, just from being on headphones and looking at a screen. I'm kind of used to it because I'm always doing this. But for other people, I find that it can definitely be creative. It's nice because you're in your house or in your studio in your own space, so it's a bit safer, which is a pro. But that's also a little bit of a con because then it's easier to procrastinate and it's easier to just feel a bit too relaxed sometimes. Once the technology is out of the way, it's easy to get into that space. But yeah, I mean, it's been awesome because I've been able to maybe not so much play like for a show because there's been a bit more latency as was mentioned for like if I'm doing something with someone in Peru or in a different country altogether. But at the same time, I'm able to actually write songs together, right? Like maybe we're not playing together at the same time, but I'm showing something and then they just bounce something back right away and we're looking at each other and we're hearing each other and then I'm able to, finish the call or whatever and then get back in the studio, record something, send it over. And I've done maybe since the pandemic started and we started doing it this way, I've probably done more than 10 albums where I've been working with a singer-songwriter that maybe their band is not really at the beginning of the pandemic going into places they don't want to go to the studio. So then we write a song together. They record the vocals and acoustic guitar at their place with me controlling their computer. We bounce ideas right away. And then I sit on the drums and show them sort of what I would do on drums for it. And then we finish the call. I record the drums, record the bass, record the guitars, record percussion, mix it over, send it to them, and then they send a couple of revisions. We do it online as well, so that we can see each other. And if they ask for more guitar, that more guitar is not relative, but I'm like this, and then they hear it right away. So it takes way less time to work through things. So yes, it's been incredible, which is again why I think that even though the pandemic is kind of over, this is not really going away. It's open doors for collaboration like it didn't really exist before.
Yeah, I really hear that in what you're talking about, and the idea that you can, not only kind of perform together, but also write together and have that whole vein of creativity is also really amazing. And Adrian's going to jump back in here with a question from John, who asks, is there any luck using a conductor or crossfeed to help keep sync across the latency?
Yeah, and in fact, that choir concert that I mentioned, so we had all these singers around New York and we had a conductor. And so he actually did conduct. I mean, I actually should post a link to it because it's on YouTube. He actually was conducting, and people were watching his cues, and incredibly, as I mentioned before, this harpist who was in San Diego, it's a very long way, like in terms of latency. She was watching his cues, and I mean, it actually worked. There's a lot of tricks to it, but it can work.
That's
Fantastic.
so funny because I read John's question and thought he meant like an electrical conductor. I wasn't picturing a orchestra conductor.
Oh. Nice. And Adrian, what would be the maximum number of people that could connect? Like when we're thinking about it, maybe across
question.
Canada.
So the thing is that there's actually, in theory, there's no limit, right? Like given sort of computing and like computers and other stuff that are involved. Here's the problem. What I found out. So basically, because I had a few groups like this, especially choirs, right, that had like 20, 30, 40 people. The problem is that the more people you have involved, if everybody is not putting in the required effort to get clean sound, right, it becomes a problem. So especially I had some choirs where it was sort of mostly like amateur musicians, and they didn't really want to spend any money, right? I mean, the good thing is with a lot of professional musicians, when I went to them, when we started doing this, if I said, go get this, if they didn't have an audio interface, they just went and got it because this was sort of like their livelihood for them, right? And it was an opportunity to play gigs and get money. And so the worst case is you have 20 people all in there and they're all using very low quality equipment. And because when we're actually in the space, one thing that's actually really amazing is that the noise floor, it should be basically zero. Like you should have, everyone has headphones on and you should hear pretty much nothing when nobody is making any sound. But if people are using like, crappy mics and so forth, right, and you're hearing a lot of background noise and all this stuff, and then you multiply that by 20, it's not good, right? So it can work in theory as long as everyone has a decent setup and is sending good quality audio and ideally video as well. And of course, logistically, I mean, I think also if you've got a lot of people involved, it just means that statistically that something could happen, right, with one of those people that lose their internet connection or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Adrian. I see another question from John, but before I do that, I want to ask Johnny another question, which is that so Wavelength has released this report. What can folks out there do to help get the word out? Because I feel like I've talked to a lot of people that have had this very problem about how do I connect with people, not only just in my own city but across Canada. What can people do to get the word out?
Oh, just share it with your friends, share it online, share. We're all connected on the internet. If you know of anyone that's dealing with this problem, suggest they check out the Band Together report. It might sound like 26 pages is a big read, but it's a breezy, digestible read. It's really just a consumer guide, ultimately, outlining these platforms. Yeah, please talk it up. Please share it with your friends. Especially people in the educational field, people who might work in the industry, producers. Really, we just want this tool is real, or this research is for the whole music sector. So I really encourage people to share it as widely as possible with anyone they think might benefit from it.
Yeah, and that's so true. I feel like this is a really important thing, and I definitely have run into people where we've had this conversation where I tell them about this project and they're very excited, and so I'm really looking forward to sharing this more. Adrian, last question to you. John is asking about how the placing of servers. I'm guessing this is towards the idea of edge caching, but maybe you can explain a little bit more about how that impacts the quality.
Yeah, sure. So actually, and I just pasted a link in the channel there, which is a sort of a map. If you click on that link, it's a map on my website showing all the places where I have servers running or could have servers running. And so the bottom line is that when you're trying to connect musicians, you are trying to figure out a place to locate the server that is going to be the most optimal in terms of latency. So the interesting thing is that, as I mentioned before, when we had some of these concerts where we had, say a rhythm section in Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, and we had some other musicians who are out in Nova Scotia, we knew that we wanted it to be very tight for the rhythm section, right? So that's why we would locate the server in one of those cities like Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal. Today when I had that test with Nashville and Virginia Beach, I looked and basically figured out that the best place was Atlanta. Now, the thing is, in theory, as I mentioned before, there's the geographic thing and then there's the internet routing. So although you can look on the map and you can go, oh, okay, let's put the server here. The first thing is sometimes there is no here. It's like in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or something, right? And so as an example, the other day, I had a musician, he was in Edmonton and he was playing with two guys in Ottawa. There's Toronto, right? But there's not a lot of other places after that. I mean, there are cities there, but they're not places where you can host servers, right? And so ideally you want it so that the latency will be as low as possible. Now, so the interesting thing is, and hence that link I sent with the map, is that you then end up having to sort of try to figure out like all the possible places you can put servers, right? Because someone contacts you and they say, oh, hey, I'm in LA and I want to work with a musician in San Diego or something like that, right? So as I mentioned earlier before, like I sort of started off and I told my wife I don't want to be running servers all over the place, and but that's what I sort of ended up having to do. And one thing that is cool, I should also mention, just with another Canadian connection. So in the beginning, I started operating all these servers myself. I think John had like these cloud VM servers here. They're basically it's all in the cloud, but yeah, they were sort of VMs, and I would have to sort of deploy everything myself by hand. I did have some automation, but later on I started working with a company that is called EdgeGap. It's in Montreal, and those guys have infrastructure for video games, right? For video game servers. So when you play a video game online and you're playing multiplayer and connecting, they have to have a server to do that. And so I contacted them and I said, I'm doing this thing and it's music, and they were really interested because it was a different application for their technology. And what's really interesting is I asked them, what is low latency to you, right? And so they told me, like maybe 40 milliseconds. So that's like for video games, 40 seconds is really good. That's terrible for us, right? Like we actually want like 1 or 2 or 3 milliseconds. So yeah, and so actually that is how I am now deploying servers in a lot of these other places, because it's actually through their network. So it's a sort of an interesting connection with the video games industry.
Fantastic. Well, listen, everyone, thank you so much for asking questions and listening to our presentations about what we've been up to. We're going to now switch over to a live presentation and of two musicians, Gurpreet Chana, sorry. He's a musician, a technician, composer, performer. He was one of the co-leaders of this project. Gurpreet and his music juxtaposes the time-honored tradition of the tabla with a number of different musical styles. He was born in Etobicoke and raised in Hamilton, Ontario, a student of the tabla since the age of 3, which is incredible. He's trained in the Punjab Gharana style and studied with Professor Parshottam Singh. And then obviously his musical styles are incredibly diverse, and we're very delighted to be able to hear from him, and also Truss. Truss was born in Brampton, Ontario, and found his sound at an early age too. What is this? It's like, like child geniuses. At 4 years old, he began singing, and at 16, he was writing poetry and writing his own music. And he's really moved into a lot of music production, and doesn't only produce music using the programs, but also plays multiple instruments, which I'm sure we'll hear today. He's a vocalist as well, and provides a very soulful, sultry lyrics, on top of his very rock solid production. And he's also written music for TV shows and documentaries. So with these two fantastic musicians, we're going to turn it over, and Adrian is going to shift us over, and that'll be the end of it. So this is the end of our kind of live aspect from us, but now we're going to turn you over to a live performance using SyncSpace with Gurpreet Chana and Truss.
Okay, thanks, Jai. All right, so I'm going to make a switch here Just give me a second. Okay, so I think we should be live now with Gurpreet and Truss. Guys, you want to just give me a bit of sound there so we can do a bit of a check?
Yeah, I can see it here.
Sounding great. Okay, over to you.
Good evening, everyone.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you so much for having us. This has been an amazing journey.
It has indeed. Thank you
Yeah.
all for being here as well.
For sure.
Taking the valuable time out of your day to connect with us all and celebrate
Yes.
the Band Together launch event. I was thinking about it a little bit earlier. It's physics in contradiction and harmony with itself is what this feels like, and what a privilege to make music together in real time. This I guess event is 3 years in the making, if you think of it in some ways, at least for the community of people that you all have met through the course of the night. But without the support of Johnny Dovercourt at Wavelength and Aaron, the Canada Council for the Arts and the Digital Strategy Fund, and all the team members, Sam, Jay, Guillermo, Olivia, and Kat, and Emma, and Ella. There's so many people that came together in addition to the technology to make this night happen. And in the room with me, there's myself and a great connector and wizard, Alkaloid, who is supporting with the sound and with the space and with a place to come to you live in this capacity. He's gonna come and say hi to you as well, so you can get to see him.
Hello, everyone.
Hey.
And obviously Truss, Truss and I have been working together for 4 years in a lot of different capacities, mostly in the studio, and we had to find ways during COVID, like all of us. But in that time, we've been focused on writing, producing, technical elements, and production. But this is our first time performing live together in this capacity, and thank you for the opportunity to delve into that side of our creative practice together.
Yeah.
And thank you again all for being here tonight to experience that in real time, through connection, technological and human. Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you want to do, Truss?
Let's do this, man.
Yeah? All right, brother.
All right. 1, 2, 3,
Awesome.
All in real time, man. Thanks to you, bro.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I mean, I think that's one of the important things that we should mention is we're really doing this in real time. We did sound check and some other things, but
Yeah.
This is really real time.
I'm switching the cameras and I'm trying to mix the sound and everything, and we're just doing it all as we go. And I think that's the cool thing.
Absolutely. Adrian,
Yeah.
everybody can hear you, right? I just want to make sure that's not just our monitor mix.
Right.
No,
Oh, okay.
in this case, so Gurpreet pointed out one thing that's pretty interesting is when we are doing a broadcast like this, there's the opportunity that I can speak to the musicians, and if I want, I can mute myself to the audience.
Right.
So if there's a technical problem, I can sort of chat with them about them, or just let them know.
Adrian was just mentioning in our monitor, I guess you didn't all hear, but Adrian, if you don't mind sharing what you just shared with me in really the context of how real time this is,
Oh, actually, no, the audience did hear all that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
these
Yes.
are some of the, these are some of the technical things and practical things that come up, and you're also seeing that in real time of being engaged but yet disengaged from the experience that I wasn't aware of that was happening. But these are things that we learn along the way, and we've learned so much together, and even in the process of getting ready for this. But this is real time.
The possibilities just seem endless, and and that's why even the nature of this performance, we're like, with all of this being so new and so fresh, our first time performing together, and so we even just wanted it to feel like it's just a typical session of us just jamming and improvising, and for us to share that with y'all is a beautiful thing. And Adrian, again, thank you for making this possible. Wavelength, thank you for making this possible. Gurpreet, my guy, thank you for making this possible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alkaloid too, big up yourself, bro. Let's keep this going though, yeah?
Let's do it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
It's feeling nice, man.
Want to try something on the hung truss? What are you feeling?
Oh yeah, man. I'll
Alright.
never turn that down.
Alright,
Let's
do
go. All right. Yeah. Everything all right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, man, that's the nature of these things too. Is like the check-ins, making sure everyone's connection is all right, everything's
Yeah.
right, exactly.
Believe us, there have been times where it's frozen.
Right.
Deep in conversation, you're playing, and
Yeah, can't hear a thing.
it's
Right,
working.
and it's working. That's all we can ask.
And you know what? We're privileged that it's working. There's so many places where we don't have the privilege, even though the solutions are there.
Yeah.
And again, accessibility is something that's been talked about,
Mm.
and it shows up in so many ways. And how can we make this opportunity of creating music together, and not just creating music together in real time? There's so many other practices that we do in our life that can benefit from doing it in real time.
Mhm.
But how can this privilege that we have be shared with as many people as possible, for those that want it and need it?
Right. Yeah, that's a vibe right
Yeah,
there.
man. Oh wow.
Nice.
What was that?
That was me. Sometimes I would do that, like on a broadcast, I would just throw something in there just to surprise the musicians.
Making sure we're still up. No, that's nice, right?
Yeah, that was nice.
That's real nice. What you feeling next, man? How you feeling?
I feel like playing my kit in a box.
All right.
My cajon. I love this thing.
Yeah, man. That's always fun. Let's have some fun.
Let's have some fun.
Let's just jam out. You start with however you feel. Fire.
Yeah, man.
Nice, man. Is it cool if I rap a little bit?
Of course, man.
Yeah, go for it. I think that should probably be the last one, hey?
Yeah? All right.
All right, let's do this.
Well, before we even close it out, again, thank you to all y'all for tuning in. Thank you again to Wavelength and, Adrian, ThinkSpace, and all of the other, platforms that we were able to dive into. A huge thanks to all of their support. And Adrian, again, just thank you for your support for us in our chapter of trying to figure things out. Your support was tremendous, and yeah, I can't emphasize that enough.
It's been great working with you guys. Sounding
Likewise,
great.
man. Thank you. Let's give it a go, G.
Let's give it a go.
All right.
Thank you again, everyone.
All right. Living life like a freestyle at this point. Find a little, trying to fill this joint. Make a little green, trying to pay my bills. And save for the names mentioned in my will. Make sure my wife's needs fulfilled. You know what? Hold up. Pause. That's another thing with doing it in real time. Sometimes the timing, we lose each other a little bit. So I know my thing is probably jumping. It's the evening time and all of my peeps are home on the internet. So forgive us. Let's try that one more time. And we could do it a little faster too.
Do you want to just check?
Yeah, that's feeling all right.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Living life like a freestyle at this point. Find a little, trying to fill this joint. Make a little green, trying to pay my bills. And save for the names mentioned in my will. Make sure my wife's needs fulfilled. May we skip no meals, manifest in meals. Only thing we stretch is ligaments and rubber bands. No more stressing over health and finance. By thine divine plan, I beg your guidance. My eyes deceive me at times. A blind man can laugh at me. Quite a catastrophe, but I still climb back on the balance beam. Like my feet got my path, got it tatted beat. Might lean, might rock, but I snap out of it like hypnosis. Eyes on the watch clock ticking against me, but I can't stop right now. I've gone too far, looking around. Don't know where we are, but we can't go back home. Only place I can't go, not until the bag flow, till cash flow. I roam and roam and roam, on and on. My cipher keep moving like a rolling stone.
Nice job. Thanks, guys.
Thank
And
you.
thanks to everyone for watching tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.